Hi, I'm Rachel, and it's my birthday, and I just got out of an administrative hearing for my unemployment benefits, as one does apparently on one's birthday during coronavirus. And it was a bit crazy and bureaucratic and lots of wires crossed. I think that's a phrase I can say made it into the record a few times, but at the end of it, it worked out well for me, or so I hope it will. I haven't officially gotten the final hearing yet, but I'm expecting it soon, and hoping to take a big load off after prepping for a hearing and everything, and things should be going my way now. Probably the best birthday gift one can get during coronavirus, particularly when one is furloughed, is relief. Financial relief. I probably shouldn't get into the nitty-gritty anyway, and I'd rather talk about what I usually talk about on this channel, which is books. And I decided that I would do a special page 112 tag on my birthday. The page 112 tag was started by Sean at Sean the Book Maniac. He fashioned it after a French prize where you judge the quality of books solely based off of the content of the writing on page 112. And I have been using this tag a few times this year, in fact 3 times this year, I'll link to my last video down below, as a way to cull my shelves of unread materials. I pick out 3 titles from this handy dandy Books and Cats mug, and then I compare and contrast page 112s, and then I read the best page. Or so I should. In fact, last month in particular, I chose a book really less based off of page 112 than off of other circumstances, and it's been bothering me ever since, like I've failed my own tag, as it were, and not played by the rules. So as a punishment, I thought I'd do a different sort of tag this month, kinda. Basically, I am not allowing myself the joy of picking random titles in this mug, which I really have been loving that burst of spontaneity. But instead, I'm going to pick one unread book from each of the last 3 page 112 tags and pit them against each other, and then, using the rules of the tag, decide which one should be my July read. I say it's a punishment, but part of it is also a reward because doing it this way I don't have to do nearly as much post-production, so huzzah! Okay, and from here, let's head back into the past! They all stood together. Robert, Zanelli, Goldfarb, Tracy, Cates, Van Dorn, Pascal. They looked more alike now than different, with their long hair, torn jeans, and sloganeering t-shirts, the slogans mostly proclaiming, in endless variation, the importance of individuality. Flyers for the event promised an appearance by someone famous. Peter, Paul, and Mary were rumored to be making a surprise visit. Someone else swore they'd heard it was Courtney Joe and the Fish. But the only musicians who played that afternoon were student musicians, and not very good ones. The sound system malfunctioned, and most of the student speakers, those who could be heard at all, lost their voices from screaming. Meanwhile, the Harvard rowing team glided along the Charles, impervious to the small crowd on the opposite bank. Shoulders squared, oars hitting the water in a tight synchronicity that obliterated individual need, and they looked to Robert as if nothing could touch them. By mid-afternoon, the protest resembled nothing so much as a group of picnickers, sitting on blankets or cardboard signs, eating sandwiches and rolling joints. Robert had fallen that semester under the spell of speed. Marijuana had begun to irritate his breathing, and Quaaludes made him sleepy at a time when he was far too sleepy already. He felt that he had to be on his toes in class, could not afford to be hypnotized by the blowing of a curtain or the lines etched in a desk. He liked the energy of speed, and found that he could go a day without eating if he needed, could write papers with remarkable clarity, had an aesthetic's lack of desire for anything but movement. His thoughts raced, all self-consciousness gone. But that afternoon, his heart pounded and his hands shook. "Got anything to calm me down?" he asked Tracy, who was now as generous with his drugs as he had been with his other possessions. "Here," he said, handing Robert a lute. Then Tracy stood up and looked into the crowd. "Hello, Boston," he shouted. "Here's my contribution to social equality." He reached into his backpack and threw out handfuls of pills into the bored, stoned crowd. I like this one too. It's pretty narrative heavy, but we get a good sense, I think, of who Robert is in this, that he seems to be some sort of student. He seems to be dealing with a drug addiction and trying to discover what brings him the best sort of high that he wants. And behind that is the backdrop of a protest, although it seems to mostly be a social event. My knowledge of the book, which first of all might not even be accurate, and second of all I shouldn't be thinking about it, is that this takes place in a college community in the 80s. But yeah, my overall assessment of the page is that it flowed easily and got me intrigued about the characters and the situation. If you can see page 112 here, there's only a tiny bit of text at the top, and then there's this italic section on page 113. So I think I'll read both of these to get the sense of a full page. And apologies for any mispronunciations of words. "They allow packages to go in and out of Rosar prison," Uncle Ferdinand said gently. "You can bring Fritz clean laundry and hide notes inside the shirts. At least that's what I've been told. When I hung up the phone, I began to gather Fritz's shirts. I thought they would smell like his cinnamon aftershave. I thought they would smell like him, but they didn't. They smelled like fear. They smelled like the people in the Metropole. They smelled like all of us." The painter shuts his work trunk and stacks it on top of the brown leather suitcases. The cats are mewling against his legs, brushing their tails along the blank canvases he's tied together with a long rope. The canvases are 4 feet squares, and he intends to paint a landscape on each one. That's his indulgence every summer. Never portraits, only landscapes. While he waits for his carriage, Mimi comes to the studio carrying the boy in her arms. They kiss hello, and he hands her a fat envelope. "It's more than enough for 2 months, he says. If you need anything, you can see Mole. He'll get word to me." The toddler is sucking on a candy and looks up at his father through wide brown eyes. "Papa will miss you," Klimt says. "I'll see you when I come back." Mimi tucks the money inside her dress and slowly walks away in the heat. When the carriage comes, Klimt and the driver lift heavy trunks into the back. The courtyard garden is hot and dusty, and he's happy to leave it behind. He closes his eyes and imagines driving straight into the cold blue Lake Attersee water. Okay, so the very first thing I did with this book is project onto that little section about Fritz and his shirts and taking shirts to him in the prison. I'm almost positive, although I haven't officially checked, that this is a Holocaust book. I know it's from my Jewish Book Council reading list, and occasionally I glomp up on the Holocaust books. I may be projecting way too much on it, but of course when I think of Jewish characters in prisons, I think of Nazis rounding people up in the beginning. But am I projecting too much? Yes, definitely. I mean, I love the feel of it, and it might be my bias again of like, is Fritz different, or is he like all of us? Are we all in the same boat here? Which, you know, plays a lot into my feelings about Judaism and the Holocaust. But in general, I like that little figment, you know. There was definite tension to be had that draws you in immediately about someone in trouble and someone trying to help him out. Then the next section was a little italicized section, which makes me wonder if this is something that repeats throughout the book. Again, I'm projecting. But with the idea of starting with the painter, especially on page 113, do all of his sections maybe start that way? But it definitely seems like a jump. And if it's the Holocaust, maybe it's a jump into the past because there's carriages, or maybe, once again, I'm projecting too much on this book. But to go with that little, you know, italicized section, we start with the painter, we get some insight into his habits, about what he likes to paint in the summer, what his life looks like with the tide canvases and the cats. And then we meet Mimi and the little boy before the narrative more or less infers that he's the father of the little boy and presumably involved with Mimi, and he's sending them off. And so there's sort of a intrigue to that, really. You know, we have sort of overly dreamy, perhaps, profession of the painter who might be a bit of a nomad, maybe. He's sending what seems to be his family away and might be out of contact. We get his name further down, which is Klimt. So that's intriguing to me too. Like, what are these people's relationships and how are they going to progress? So I was definitely drawn in with all of this, and I wonder how they fit together. And I should find out through reading and not through assuming too much here. And what do you know? This one's at the very bottom of my makeshift camera tripod. Ta-da! And I'm going to read a little bit more than, I guess, page 112. I did for the last book, too, because there was a run-on sentence. But with this one in particular, it's a large textbook, so I figure it is even more incentive that I should go on a little bit into 113, into the end of a section. Mostly girls crash here, she said. It depends. And Nico sometimes, even though I don't want him to. I want him to grow up free, but he likes me. A square of stained silk was tacked above a mattress, a Mickey Mouse pillowcase on the bed. Suzanne passed me a rolled cigarette, the end wet with her saliva. Ash fell on her bare thigh, but she didn't seem to notice. It was weed, but it was stronger than what Connie and I smoked, the dry refuse from Peter's sock drawer. This was oily and dank, and the cloying smoke it produced didn't dissipate quickly. I waited to start feeling differently. Connie would hate all this. Think this place was dirty and strange, that Guy was frightening. This knowledge made me proud. My thoughts were softening, the weeds starting to surface. Are you really 16? Suzanne asked. I wanted to keep up the lie, but her gaze was too bright. I'm 14, I said. Suzanne didn't seem surprised. I'll give you a ride home if you want. You don't have to stay. I licked my lips. Did she think I couldn't handle this? Or maybe she thought I would embarrass her. I don't have to be anywhere, I said. Suzanne opened her mouth to say something, then hesitated. Really, I said, started to feel desperate. It's fine. There was a moment when Suzanne looked at me, when I was sure she'd send me home, pack me back to my mother's house like a truant. But then the look drained into something else, and she got to her feet. You can borrow a dress, she said. Okay, so once again, I come in with the bias of knowing that this story is, it's sort of a riff on the Manson family and what drew young girls to that cult leader. So I am coming in with a bias again. I can't seem to escape it about thinking, well, Suzanne and the narrator are maybe in his compound or whatever it would be, and the smoking weed even kind of plays into that, taking drugs that might alter your perception of reality. And it's not really fair of me to think of all that, I suppose. On the page, I see a desperate 14-year-old girl who kind of wants to have an experience that's beyond her, like she thinks about a friend in her who had less potent weed, and how, hey, this is a step up, that I can have this more potent weed, and she tries and fails to keep up the lie that she's older than she is, and she's obviously trying to make an impression on this woman, Suzanne, who I guess I would assume she looks up to in some sort of way based on her behavior. It's interesting. I mean, the writing to me is like what I'm naturally attracted to when it comes to a lot of the literary fiction I read. It's very personal. There's lots of physical details and also some emotional details about the setting and the situation. It didn't grab me as much as the Attenberg, but it's something. Okay, now we're back in the present on July 15th. I hope you loved my nifty special effects there. So to recap, my June book was Rich Boy by Sharon Pomerantz. My May book was Stolen Beauty by Lori Lyko Albanese. I've said her name so many different times and now I feel like I should just pronounce all the vowels. And my April book was Girls by Emma Cline. And I'm going to go with Rich Boy by Sharon Pomerantz because ever since I did this as part of my June 112 tag and didn't ultimately read it, I felt like this was the one that actually most fully fit the prompt. It was really strong writing from a book I'd never read before, so I don't know much else about this. I just like how full and rich it was. I mean, I also like the writing in Girls, but I think that this one had just more going on in it. We had internal stuff, but also a lot of external world building as well, so I really felt like I was in the scene. And then Stolen Beauty, alas, I think is the one that just was ripped off really by page 112. It just was that, technically speaking, what was on page 112 was so slight that it didn't make much of an impact, and then the secondary page was also kind of weird and ethereal, so it's too bad, because maybe another page of this would have read better, and there was some compelling stuff that I've read anyway, but technically this one fits the prompt more. And so I will be reading this in July and will not be scared off by long page counts, because that's not a way to be. You're going to scare yourself away from too many long books, and that would be a shame. So, yeah. So that about covers it for me now. You can find links to the Goodreads pages for these 3 books down below. And I will be back on Friday to talk about my Friday reads. Future Rachel here, because I forgot to add in a shout out to a TBR game. This is something else I've been doing on my page 112 text this year, is that I have been giving some credit to the various TBR games that booktubers seem to be involved in to add some spontaneity to their own reading. And usually I have been highlighting a specific game with a playlist of several videos, but this time I decided just to go for one specific video. About 8 months ago, a library from Alexa did a carnival-themed book tag, and she chose her books for the month, doing a fall-themed carnival, but I'm just gonna rein it back into summer, I think. And she made various games for herself, like Ring Toss and Bob for Apples, that she did in her garage. And I thought that was great because, you know, it's coronavirus time, so we need to find ways to have carnivals by ourselves, perhaps, rather than going out in public. So check it out down below. In the meantime, I'm going to go off and enjoy the rest of my birthday day. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.